never asked to be born into this. Nobody does. But here you are, sitting in a sterile government office, fluorescent lights humming above your head, your hands wrapped around a paper cup of terrible coffee, and a federal agent across the table is telling you something that doesn't make sense, something that can't be real, except it is. Your father wasn't just a businessman. He wasn't just the man who missed your birthdays and sent checks instead of showing up. He was the architect, the ghost behind the ghost, the man the DEA, the FBI, and 3 foreign intelligence agencies have been hunting for 22 years. And he's dead now. And you are his only blood heir. Welcome to the inheritance you never wanted. Let that sink in for a second. Because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a mistake. You're thinking there's been some mix-up, some bureaucratic error, some crossed wire in the system. But there hasn't been. The DNA doesn't lie. The documents don't lie. The 37 encrypted bank accounts in the Cayman Islands with your biometric signature already registered don't lie. Your father was the supreme commander of the most feared cartel operation ever to plant roots on American soil. A hybrid empire built on the bones of the Sinaloa cartel's northern expansion, fused with the brutal street network of MS-13 and the financial infrastructure of a dozen ghost corporations running from Miami to Seattle. He didn't just move product. He moved governments. He moved judges. He moved silence. And now that silence has a new name. Yours. You were 19 when you first noticed that you were being watched. Not the paranoid kind of watched. Not the feeling you get on a subway platform late at night. Real surveillance. A black SUV that appeared in 3 different cities during 3 different months. A man at a coffee shop who always seemed to be reading the same newspaper. A woman at your university who asked too many questions about your childhood and then disappeared from campus entirely. You filed it away as coincidence. People like you, raised by a single mother, modest apartment, scholarship kid grinding through economics classes. Don't get followed. You're nobody. Except you weren't nobody. You were the most valuable secret in the Western Hemisphere. Your mother knew. Of course she knew. She's been carrying that weight since before you were born. Running from a man who loved her in the only way a man like that could love. Obsessively, dangerously, and ultimately at a distance. She gave you her last name, her neighborhood, her world. She gave you the life of a normal kid because the alternative was this moment, this table, this paper cup of terrible coffee, and a federal agent who needs something from you. They want you to cooperate, to hand over the access codes, the account structures, the network maps your father left inside a dead drop you didn't even know existed until 48 hours ago. They're offering protection, a new identity, a clean slate. But then there's the other side of the table. Because there's always another side, isn't there? His name is Delgado. He arrived at your apartment before the feds did. He's your father's oldest lieutenant, a man with calm eyes and a 3-piece suit that costs more than your mother's car. He sat at your kitchen table and drank your coffee and spoke to you like you were already royalty. He didn't threaten you. He didn't need to. He simply slid a photograph across the table. Your mother at the grocery store yesterday at 2:47 in the afternoon, and said, "Your father always kept his family safe. We intend to continue that tradition. The question is, under whose authority?" This is the inheritance. not money, not power. This, the choice. You spend the first 24 hours in shock. You move through the world like a man walking underwater. Everything slow, everything muffled, the edges of reality slightly wrong. You go back to your apartment and you sit on the floor of your bedroom, not on the bed, on the floor. And you stare at the wall and try to build a version of this story where you come out clean, where you hand over the codes, accept the federal protection, and go back to being nobody. But the math doesn't work because you've been studying financial systems for 3 years. You understand networks. You understand how power operates. And you understand, with the cold clarity of someone who has just been handed a 1,000-page document outlining the operational infrastructure of a criminal empire, that there is no clean exit from a system this large. You don't walk away from a billion-dollar architecture. You don't hand it to the government and skip off into the sunset. Systems this complex have contingencies. They have dead man switches. They have lieutenants who didn't get the memo that the game is over. If you hand it to the feds, Delgado burns the network. And the network burning doesn't look like spreadsheets going dark. It looks like fires. It looks like bodies. It looks like your mother at the grocery store, except this time there's no photograph. There's no warning. There's just an absence. So you do something nobody expects. You don't run to the feds. You don't run to Delgado. You run to the library. You spend 72 hours pulling every piece of public information ever documented about RICO prosecutions, cartel organizational hierarchies, federal informant programs, and the structural vulnerabilities of criminal enterprises that attempted legitimate transition. You read about the takedown of the Gambino family. You study the Colombian government's negotiated demobilization of paramilitary networks. You dig into academic papers about organizational collapse in illicit economies. And then you understand something your father apparently never did. The cartel doesn't need a king. It needs an accountant. Not in the way Delgado means. Not someone to move the money and keep the machine running. Someone to dismantle the machine so slowly, so methodically, that nobody realizes it's being dismantled until it's already gone. You can't blow this up from the outside. The feds have been trying that for 22 years, and your father built contingencies around every angle. But from the inside, from the heir's chair, you can starve it. You call Delgado. You tell him you're in. The penthouse they set you up in overlooks the Chicago skyline. The suit they put on your back costs more than a semester of tuition. The phone they hand you has numbers in it that make your stomach drop. Not just cartel captains and money men, but senators' private lines, police commissioners' personal cells, a sitting federal judge who apparently spent 3 weekends a year at a property your father owned in Arizona. The scale of it is staggering. Not in the romantic way, not in the movie way, in the nauseating, vertigo-inducing way of a person who has just seen how deep the rot goes and realized they're standing in the middle of it. Delgado walks you through the structure with the pride of a man showing off a cathedral he helped build. 12 distribution cells across 7 states, 47 shell companies processing the cash flow, a network of corrupt officials so embedded in municipal infrastructure that removing them would require dismantling entire city governments. 3 ports of entry managed by CBP officers who have been on the payroll for so long, their kids' college funds are built on dirty money. Your father spent 15 years building this, Delgado tells you. He always said the real power wasn't the product, it was the system around the product. You nod. You take notes. You smile at the right moments and ask the right questions and perform the role of the heir who is finally ready to step into his birthright. But at night, alone in the penthouse, you're building a different architecture. You start small. A shell company here, a routing adjustment there. Changes so subtle that the network's financial managers barely notice. You begin documenting every corrupt official, every compromised judge, every police officer on the payroll, not to protect them, to build a file. The kind of file that, in the right hands, at the right moment, is more explosive than any federal indictment. Delgado notices your focus on the financial systems and mistakes it for ambition. He calls you your father's son. He tells the other captains that the blood runs true. He has no idea what you're actually building. 3 months in, you make your first real move. One of the distribution cell leaders, a man named Torres who has been skimming for years and brutalizing anyone who mentions it, gets a visit from his local police captain. Not a paid visit, a real one, driven by an anonymous tip that contains just enough specific information to be credible. Just enough vagueness to avoid exposing the network's full structure. Torres gets arrested. His cell fractures. Delgado is frustrated but not suspicious. This kind of thing happens. You offer to restructure the cell, more efficiently, of course. 6 months in, you have files on 43 officials. You have redirected approximately $60 million through legitimate investment vehicles in ways that will take forensic accountants years to fully untangle. But that, in the meantime, are slowly starving the cells that depend on that cash flow. You have identified every dead man switch in the network and begun quietly, painstakingly, disarming them one by one. You haven't fired a weapon. You haven't ordered anyone hurt. You have sat in rooms with genuinely terrible people and drunk expensive whiskey and nodded at the right moments and smiled at the right moments and slowly, methodically, with the patience of someone who spent 3 years studying systems theory, you have been dismantling the most dangerous criminal empire in America from the inside. But now, Delgado is getting suspicious. The losses are too consistent. The cell failures, too neat. A man with his experience doesn't believe in coincidence. And 3 bad months in a row isn't coincidence. He's watching you. You can feel it. The small test he ran last week, a transaction he described to you and then misrepresented in the ledger, waiting to see if you'd correct it. You passed. Barely. But the test tells you something important. Your window is closing. You have maybe 30 days before Delgado stops being suspicious and starts being certain. So now comes the question that's kept you awake for 6 months. The question you've been building toward without letting yourself look at it directly. Because when this ends, when you trigger the mechanism you've been constructing, when the files go to the prosecutors and the account structures collapse and the dead man switches fire blanks, what happens to you? The feds might honor their original offer, or they might not. A year ago, you were a clean college kid with no priors. Now, you've spent 6 months operating inside a criminal enterprise. You've attended meetings. You've signed documents. You've moved money. That you were doing it to destroy the network from within is a story. A credible story. Maybe. But stories need corroboration. You call the one person you trust, the only person you've kept completely clear of this entire thing. Your roommate from your first year at university, now working at a law firm in Boston. You don't tell him everything. You don't need to. You just ask, hypothetically, if someone had been operating as an informant inside a criminal organization without formal law enforcement authorization, what would their legal exposure look like? He's quiet for a long moment. Then he says, that person would need a very good lawyer and a very convincing story. What if they had documentation of everything? Another pause. That changes things considerably. You have documentation of everything. The next 72 hours are the most dangerous of your life. You trigger the mechanism, the files, the account information, the names, the dates, the recorded conversations you've been quietly archiving for 6 months, all of it packaged and encrypted and sent simultaneously to 3 federal prosecutors, 2 investigative journalists, and a Senate Oversight Committee. Then you call Delgado. You tell him there's been a development, something he needs to see immediately, something in the financial records that looks like an internal breach. You meet him at the penthouse. You walk him through the numbers, or the appearance of numbers. You keep him focused on the screen while the clock ticks down to the moment the files hit their targets. You're in the middle of a sentence when his phone rings. He looks at the screen. His face doesn't change. Not at first. The face of a man who has survived 40 years in this business by never letting his face change, but his eyes. His eyes go somewhere else for just a moment. He looks at you, really looks at you, and you see the exact moment he understands. Your father always said you were the smartest person in any room, he says. His voice is very quiet. He wasn't wrong. I know. This ends you. You understand that. Whatever deal you think you've cut, these people will burn you too. Probably, you say. But it ends the network, and that's worth more. He's quiet for a long time. Outside the windows, the Chicago skyline glitters cold and indifferent. You're not your father's son, he says finally. No, you agree. I'm not. The federal agents arrive 11 minutes later. You don't know yet what your life looks like after this. The lawyers are going to be complicated. The testimony is going to be brutal. There will be years of this. Court proceedings, security concerns, the long, slow work of rebuilding a life in the shadow of all this wreckage. But as they lead you out of the penthouse, not in handcuffs, not yet, the deal is still being negotiated. You pass a window and catch your own reflection. You barely recognize the person looking back at you. Harder, older, carrying things you're not sure you'll ever be able to put down. You chose to destroy it instead of inherit it. Most people, given the power, wouldn't have. Most people would have convinced themselves they could control it, moderate it, make it something less monstrous than what it was. The inheritance seduces even the people who know exactly what it is. You knew, and you burned it anyway. Was it worth it? That question is going to follow you for the rest of your life. Drop your answer in the comments. Did you make the right call? Or did you just trade one cage for another? If you believe some stories need to be told, hit subscribe and the notification bell, because we're just getting started. And if this hit you somewhere real, leave a like. It's the only thing that keeps the lights on here. The truth always costs something. The only question is whether you're willing to pay it.